If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who have encountered ghosts or other supernatural beings, what was your experience like? What happened? I can't believe I'm actually going to share this, but here goes. I was in college when my grandfather died. He simply fell to the ground in mid-sentence. The coroner said it was a burst aneurysm, and he was gone before he hit the ground. My grandmother called me that night and told me. I made arrangements to go home the next morning. I was in a fog of disbelief. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours, alternatively feeling that numb fog and being overcome with grief. I heard a noise at the bedroom door, like someone had just stepped across the threshold, and rose up on my elbows to look, and there he stood. He was standing just inside the door, near the foot of my bed, his hands in his pockets, just looking at me with a kind smile. He didn't say anything at all. Just stood there and smiled. When I sat up, he nodded. His smile got bigger. And that was it. He was gone as though he had never been there. But after that, everything was different. Everything felt different. There was a sense of peace that stayed with me, through the funeral, through the days after, when my whole family was falling apart. That image of him was etched in my mind so clearly that he might as well have been right there, standing right beside me. A few days after the funeral, my grandmother asked me to go through the bag of his personal effects that the hospital had given her. She needed his wallet for something, but she didn't feel capable of going through it herself yet. I opened up the bag and started pulling things out, and lo and behold, the clothes he was wearing the day he died were the same clothes he was wearing when I saw him in my bedroom doorway that night. Even down to that funny orange knit cap he wore when it was really, really cold outside. So, coincidence? Sure, it could be. My logical mind says that I saw him in those clothes many times, and it's entirely possible that when I thought of him that night, he was wearing them. It's also possible that I conjured up an image of him in my tired, grief-stricken state. Grief does some crazy things. But none of that explains the flood of peace that surrounded me and changed everything for a very long time after that. It's that feeling that convinces me he was there, checking on me, doing his best to take care of me. I am absolutely certain of what I saw and felt. And now I'm getting all weepy, but for all the good reasons. Thank you, Pa. I love you. My senior year in high school, I was on my way to meet up with a few friends at a boat landing near my hometown. I was passing a gas station when I saw a car just like mine leaving the station. I managed to see the driver and passengers. The driver was me and the passengers were the friends I was on my way to meet. When I looked in the rear view, the car had disappeared. I can't quite describe how this encounter made me feel, but it soured my mood and I decided to go home. The next day I found out that those friends had gotten into a wreck leaving the boat landing and one of them had died. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. I lived in a house as a kid where a 17-year-old boy had died in the barn. We noticed odd things happening when we first moved in, but didn't know Kenny's story until one of the neighbors asked if we'd met him yet. They told us that people who lived in the house since reported various low-level paranormal activity. Just to be clear, I'm a data scientist. I'm incredibly skeptical when it comes to stuff like this. That being said, there were 3 things that happened in that house that I'll never be able to explain. The first was the footsteps. My bedroom closet was underneath the stairs to the 2nd floor of the house, and some nights I would hear footsteps stomping up and down the stairs even when everyone else was asleep. They sounded like boots. The second was on Sunday, coming home after leaving for the afternoon to find every single window in the house open. This included windows to upstairs rooms that none of us ever used. The house was locked, nothing was stolen or moved, and we lived out in the country, so we didn't have close neighbors. It was just the windows. The other was a particular event that happened one evening as my sister was washing dishes and watching my RC car do tricks outside. My mom was just about finished cooking dinner, and she asked my sister to call me in. So my sister yells for me, and a few seconds later I appear in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room with a book in my hand. Right then, the RC car stopped moving. I'd dismiss these stories if I read them, but the fact that I experienced them will always fuck with my confidence in my understanding of the world. I don't exactly believe in ghosts, but I can't discount that something happened. When my kid was 2, she had an imaginary friend. Her name was Aida. She would talk to her all the time. Now, I know that sounds normal, but things started to happen around this time that I cannot explain. Various toys of hers would go off at random times, even after the batteries were removed. I once woke up to find my kid at the dark corner of the living room just whispering to something. She had no idea I was awake, so I just stared at her without making any noise. I guess she realized someone was looking because she turned around super fucking slowly and walked back to bed. Another time, my sil and I were asking questions about her friend. It didn't take too long before my kid started smiling and shouted, "She's laughing at you." It started to get worse a week after that. When I was laying down with my husband and kid, I noticed her looking behind me at an empty hallway. At that same moment, my husband swore he heard someone call out kid's name from behind. Thinking it was his brother's wife we were visiting, he ignored it. But once I looked at the same place he heard the voice, he knew it wasn't her. And our kid just kept staring that way. The last time anything remotely creepy happened was the next month after being at his brother's house. I just put my daughter to sleep and walked to the kitchen where we had guests over. We were all playing a card game when I heard her scream. I thought she was just having a nightmare. Nope. I walked over to her and she's clearly still asleep. But she is screaming as if something is scaring her. I foolishly pick her up and try to wake her, but she won't wake up. She keeps screaming, so I decide to walk outside with her still in my arms. Once we reached outside, she was screaming, "Leave me alone." I quickly realized that having a screaming toddler outside of an apartment was not wise, so I bring her inside. Once we pass the kitchen, she kicks herself off of me, and starts to take her onesie PJs off. She crawled under the table and wouldn't stop crying. She's screaming about someone burning her and we're all trying to get her to calm down. Finally she wakes up, crawls out from the table and walks over to me. I pick her up, and notice all these scratches on her legs. That was the last time anything creepy happened. She doesn't remember anything and I don't talk about it. We burned some sage around the apartment after that night and we are now at a different place. There are some weird things my kid says that we try to ignore, but overall everything has stopped. I saw a man in old-fashioned clothes in the basement or near the stairs down a few times at the house my family moved into when I was a teenager. Once I was watching Jurassic Park in the family room, and I suddenly realized that I could see a dude from the corner of my eye, standing near the stairs and staring toward me and the TV. Of course there wasn't anyone there when I turned around. Our computer was in the basement rec room back then, and I saw him a couple times when I stayed on the computer too late at night. Once I think he even walked down the stairs while I was sitting on them and petting the cat. It had been really hot that day, but suddenly this blast of cold air moved past me down the steps just as the cat spooked and took off up the steps. He just surprised me when I saw him, but the basement took on a really nasty, unfriendly feeling at night. When I was younger, I saw something black and sort of cat or weasel shaped, which gave of this feeling of just absolute evil, walking through the wall in the basement storage room, and always felt like something was watching me from that room. Also, one of the dorms I lived in during college was haunted. Literally all of the people I talked to regularly there had a story about Flick, our resident ghost. On the top residential floor, you could hear footsteps running back and forth and furniture being dragged around in the attic storage almost every night. When I moved from one single to the bigger one next door, I took about half my stuff over and decided to worry about the rest in the morning. I spent all night listening to the things I'd put in the closet next door slam up against the wall next my bed. Once I was fully moved into my new room, my door would occasionally slam open even if the door was locked, and the room would get really cold until I said hi to Flick, and then it would warm up again. Also, I had trouble with my closet and door opening by themselves. A friend told me to ask Flick to knock it off, and it actually seemed to work. After I said out loud, "Flick, I don't care what you do with the doors while I'm here, but could you leave them alone when I'm sleeping or out? I don't want my stuff stolen, and it's creepy to have the closet door open up in the middle of the night." They stayed closed at night. There was also a ghost girl on the 4th floor. I went to see if a friend who lived up there was home one day, and stopped to use the bathroom on my way down the hall. Just as I was turning to go into the hall, there was suddenly a really pale 11 to 12-year-old girl right in front of me, going into the room before the bathroom. She stared at me in a really weird way, and there was something I found really unsettling about her, but she'd vanished into the room before I could even apologize for almost running into her. Then a minute later I realized that she'd never opened or closed that door. I was still pretty shaken when I got to my friend's room and told her what had happened, and she was just sort of like, "Oh, yeah, she's around a lot. I saw her down in the kitchen the other day." Once me and some friends were driving on the highway in Oz in the middle of the night trying to get back home to TX. My friend was driving way too fast, lost control of the car, and we ended up spinning, and when we finally came to a stop we were only a few feet away from going into a ditch. We were checking all the tires, and when we walked around the front of the car, we saw a set of handprints in the dust on the hood, as if someone had stopped the car. We were pretty shaken up. We called a friend whose sister had actually died on that same stretch of road, and he started crying, before telling us that our call woke him up from a dream in which he was talking to his sister. My current house is haunted by a little girl. She is harmless and I don't get the sense of danger or anything. I am guessing she is around 8 or 9. I have never seen her. But she will call me by mom. She also calls out others in the house. She will just randomly call out your name and you will answer only to realize there is no one home or that only men are at the house. We have a house of 7. Everyone has heard her. My 15-year-old daughter has seen her once. She was sitting at the dining room table looking forlorn. The only time that she has been negative was when my 23-year-old son was Skyping his girlfriend. We weren't too fond of her as a family, but we didn't dislike her. I guess she was talking to my son in a way that little girl ghost didn't like and told her to shut up. I have lived in the house for 10 years and I have heard her maybe 8 times. She has been less active in the past few years. There's a small graveyard near my home in Michigan. About 2 years ago a group of my friends and I went ghost hunting there. It was a warm night, clear skies, and I was raring to catch a ghost on my friend's camera or tape recorder. Even a cell phone video would do. The cemetery is less than an acre, so it didn't take long to scope out. We broke into groups of 2 and 3 and traversed the grounds. I wandered with a few people, changing from group to group. I felt restless. Usually when we were ghost hunting, we cracked wise, but nobody was saying much. A group near a tall monument, at least 7 feet high and shrouded in vines, called us over. There seemed to be a cold spot about the size and shape of a very tall man. I waved my hands through the air. It did feel a bit cooler, but that could have been my imagination. Everyone began taking pictures, claiming they could see a figure in the digital photos. I hung near the back of the group, not seeing anything. I still felt disquieted. I didn't want to be here. That was when a cold shock squeezed my hand, right between the web of flesh between my right thumb and forefinger. I cried out, yanking my hand away. It hurt. The cold radiated slowly off my hand, and I retreated towards the gate. "I'm out." Something grabbed me. "I'm out." I was quickly followed by the rest of the party, not so much because of my encounter, but nobody wanted to be in there anymore. It wasn't until the morning the bruise showed up. Deep in the meat of my hand, not a bad bruise, not bad enough to turn black and blue, but definitely there. Yellow and painful, right in the spot where I'd been grabbed by that cold hand. I haven't been back. I used to go on professional paranormal investigations all the time, just for fun and because I was a huge skeptic and liked calling BS. I eventually saw things with my own eyes, but prior to that, I realized that at the very least, maybe it was possible there was some weird-ass energy following me around. While living at former SOS, we had internet, a TV, my cell phone, car and laptop all quit working in some manner within a couple weeks after an investigation. I jokingly was like, it's the ghost, but I didn't really buy it. Until about a month later, when me and that so broke up, 'cause ghosts, and I had to move back in with my parents. They didn't know I had experienced all that stuff, and within a week of me moving back, my mom goes, "It's the weirdest thing. Since you moved back, the washer and the microwave have both broken." I then made the mistake of saying it's the ghost, because then she came into my room with a Bible and tried to exorcise me. I'm not really a believer in ghost stories, but this happened to me, and I've never been able to make sense of it, and it scared the living hell out of me. It's not a typical ghost story, but something was there with me. In my early 20s, some of my closest friends and I rented a brownstone in a very big city, and it was, without a doubt, the funniest 4 years of my life. We threw parties, we drank an ungodly amount, met a bunch of women and married some of them, just awesome. If my whole life flashes before my eyes the moment I die, I'm really looking forward to reliving that part of my life. We rented the first floor and the basement, and the guy who lived downstairs was constantly talking about how the place was haunted, or that we had a ghost, or that there was something downstairs with him. This guy smoked a lot, still does, so we were all like, yeah, right, awesome, you're high, don't worry about it. Nobody else had a run-in with said ghost, so we didn't pay too much mind. Fast forward to the end of year 4, and we're all moving out. We had done incredible damage to this brownstone over 4 years. I'm not really proud of that, but it is what it is. My roommate and I were the last one in the house, and we took our last bags and started walking to the van. I told him, wait, hold on, I forgot to close the windows, and I went back in the empty house. I was in the front room, alone in the apartment, and I heard a deafening crack. It was the sound of an entire tree falling to the ground, and it was, I can honestly say, the loudest frickin' thing I have ever heard in my life, and my body freaked out. I started shaking and broke out in a cold sweat, and I had this really weird fight or flight reaction. I put my fist up in front of my face, boxer style, and ran out of the front room, to punch a ghost? Something? And ran outside. I'm mentally healthy, have never done acid, no flashbacks possible, I was totally sober. And we were in the middle of the city. Not a tree for miles. There is no explanation for what I experienced. And the scary thing is, it's such a natural sound. My more logical friends tell me it was a recording or a song or something, but, no. Something made that sound. Something wanted us out of that apartment, and when I came back, it was like, oh, hell no. Get out. I live within 30 minutes of Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and my dad is good friends with the owner. My dad even helps out with tour groups so that people don't wander off. My uncle also works there and believes in the supernatural, unlike my dad. He's told of many stories up there. One of them involved my dad. They were walking around a tour group, and my dad decided to walk to the 3rd floor while everybody else was on the 4th floor. Well, my dad comes back and my uncle asks him why he went to the other end of the floor. My dad responded with, I just now got back from the 3rd floor. Turns out, my uncle thinks that he had seen my dad's doppelganger on that floor. There's also Timmy in Waverly Hills, which I've seen firsthand. They have a ball up on, I believe, the 5th floor. If you talk to Timmy, he'll play with the ball by moving it a little bit. Timmy is up on the 5th floor because that's where the swings were for the kids with TB. Timmy was a patient and died there. There's plenty of stories in Waverly Hills, and people freak out at the place on a daily basis. Guys will piss themselves because they're scared. The place just has that feeling like something else is there with you. Friend is working at a construction site. His friend is in a ditch using a jackhammer. A dump truck goes to dump dirt into the ditch, so they clear everyone out, but the guy on the jackhammer doesn't hear it, so they end up dumping tons of dirt on this guy. They dig him out, but he's in bad shape. The foreman tells everyone to not call the ambulance, since I'm assuming they weren't following OSHA protocol or whatever. Eventually my friend says fuck that and calls an ambulance. However, the guy doesn't make it. That night, my friend is out in his driveway smoking a cigarette as he usually does. He said he then saw his friend, that just died, walk up his driveway and ask him for a cigarette. Over 10 years ago I was in a bad place mentally. I am a firm believer in the occult and believe in God, ghosts and the supernatural. At the time I had collected a few Ouija boards and was really into trying to speak to the dead. After several months of feeling like I was a medium, I was starting to feel off. I was having horrendous thoughts that were very out of character for me. Thoughts of suicide, rape, murder and torture, to name some of the tamer imaginings I was having. It got so bad that my hands were bleeding because I could not stop washing them. The guilt I felt from these thoughts was taking me over, and I thought I was going insane. It was around this point that I knew I needed to have a conversation with my mom about what was happening. So I told her everything, and she told me I needed to see a doctor. I began researching OCD and the effects of it. A week or so after confiding in my mom, I went and saw our family doctor. At 16 I was terrified of the idea of being mentally ill. I nervously told the doctor everything that I had been feeling, and he fills out a prescription for Prozac and recommends I see a shrink. I take the papers he gives me and shrug home. I tell my mom what he said and start to plan my road to recovery. A few days later, while researching some stuff about Ouija boards, trying to take my mind off of things, I come across an article about something called demonic oppression. Holy fuck. This was me. This was the definition of that was happening to me. My symptoms were all on par with what the article was referencing. Basically, it is the idea of not being possessed and having a demon in you, but the idea of one being around you trying to bring you down as much as possible. It can lead to demonic possession. The number one route cause believed to entice a negative energy to harass you. Playing with Ouija boards. I then began researching how to be rid of this hypothetical oppression. Get rid of you boards and make sure to dispose of them correctly. I began to do so. breaking the board and separating the pieces, making sure the pieces never touch when disposed of, and to separate the planchettes as well. I put it all in separate bags and it sat in our garbage for a day or two. Garbage day rolls around and I hear the truck outside around the corner making its stops. Shit. I forgot I had kitty litter stuff to throw out, so I run downstairs and head to the front door. My dad stops me at the bottom of the stairs and proceeds to mock me for having to clean up cat shit. I ignore him, not making eye contact as he was annoying me and full on laughing at me at this point. I dart past and throw the shit into our bin to see the Ouija board bags being put into the garbage truck. When I enter the house, it's quiet. I yell to my dad and no one answers. 15 seconds go by and my mom comes in from work. She says hi and I ask where dad went. She tells me he hasn't been home yet from work and that he had to pick something up from the grocery store. I tell her he must have forgot to stop on the way home because I just spoke to him in person like 2 minutes ago. She said that's impossible because she was just talking to him on the phone. I run to a phone and call him. Sure enough, he's still at the A&P and he totally confused with what I am talking about. I hang up in complete shock. No one else was home and 100% looked and sounded like my dad. I know that was the last hooray for the thing that so much enjoyed making me feel like the devil's toilet paper. After the boards were taken away, all my symptoms stopped. Like overnight stopped. To this day I am scared to think of what I might have seen had I looked my father in the eyes that day. In my early teens, I occasionally saw the figure of a man in my house. I was probably 12 or 13 when I first saw him. Knowing the layout of my childhood home kind of helps understand the story. I grew up in a split-level house. Everyone's bedrooms were upstairs, with one shared bathroom. At the end of the hall was a flight of stairs that led down into the living room. The kitchen was right next to the living room, just out of sight from the top of the stairwell. One morning, I was walking down the hall from my bedroom to the bathroom, when I saw a man at the bottom of the stairs out of the corner of my eye. I just caught a glimpse of him walking from the living room into the kitchen. He was a tall Caucasian male with light-colored hair, wearing a green plaid shirt and tan pants. I didn't get a good look at his face. Now, I was the only one awake at this point. A smart person probably would have called for help, or quietly gone to wake up their parents with concerns about an intruder. I was not very smart, so I chose to sneak downstairs and investigate further. Maybe the fact that I hadn't heard anything made it seem more likely that it was a figment of my imagination. I'm not sure. Anyway, I didn't find anything or anyone in the house. I shrugged it off as my tired eyes playing tricks on me and went about my day. A few months later I saw him again. Same time of day, same place, same outward appearance. Light hair, green plaid shirt, tan pants. I never saw him straight on or clearly, always out of the corner of my eye, and always vanishing out of sight into the kitchen. That went on inconsistently for years. Sometimes I'd see him 2 or 3 times in a week, and sometimes it would be months between incidents. I started having more weird experiences at home around that time as well, hearing footsteps when I was home alone, doors slamming open or closed, stuff like that. The man in the green plaid shirt was the only sighting I ever had, though. I was honestly worried that I was going crazy or something, so I never told my family about any of it. We moved when I was a junior in high school, and I never had any paranormal experiences in the new house. I guess we left whatever was happening behind at our old place. A few years later, I was home from college. I was chilling with my mom one night, and we were getting sappy with each other, reminiscing about old times, talking about my childhood, stuff like that. The conversation went towards the house I grew up in, and I said something along the lines of, yeah, I never said anything because I thought it was crazy, but I had some weird experiences there for a few years before we moved. Without any prompting, my mom turned to me and said, "Did you see the man in the green plaid shirt?" I will never forget the mixed feeling of terror and relief knowing that what I had seen and experienced was legitimate. I was around 10, my younger cousin was 6. We were playing in her room at her house in Virginia. Her mom was on the property but out at the barn. It's an older house from around the early 1800s. We'd been alone in the house for a while playing with Barbies and I was reading books to her. We went to her older sister's room to get one of her dolls. Older sister was not home at the time, nor had she been all weekend. My older cousin had an incredible glass figurine collection that she had placed on a corner shelf, 3 or 4 tiers high. Dolls being on the top shelf, glass animals and such below that. We hadn't even so much as crossed the threshold into her room when we saw the glass everywhere. 90% of it shattered. The corner cabinet was still standing. The dolls were on the windowsill, safe from harm. The glass figurines were all over the room, shattered in a circular pattern. The only things that were not shattered were a glass teapot, a glass ball with a river in the middle, and a glass shoe. Those were placed in the middle of the circle. My aunt came in while we were looking at all this and proceeded to yell at us for destroying all the glass. I burst into tears and my cousin calmly told her mom that this was all Emily's doing since we weren't in the room. Talked to my older cousin and sure enough they believe they have a ghost named Emily. I've had half a dozen or so unexplained encounters over the past 20 years and it remains the one ghost I believe in. Still can't shake that scene from my mind. This happened years ago now, but I still remember it clearly. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a huge thunderstorm outside. Being a scaredy cat, I ran into my parents' room and begged my mom to come and sleep with me because I was scared. She agreed and we began to head back to my bedroom. On the way there, my mom decided she had to use the toilet. I was still feeling scared and made her leave the open a crack and let me stand right outside the toilet with my back facing her so I felt safer. So after a few minutes of me waiting, I noticed a solid dark figure move from behind me to in front of me. At the time I thought this thing was my mom. The thing was not like a shadow, it had form. It was a solid dark mass that exactly resembled a person standing in a dark room. My point is, this thing was not some transparent shadow, it was a lifelike shape. Anyway, after the thing moved from behind me, it paused for a moment just in front of me before it started moving forward again. As I said, I thought this was my mom, so I stupidly followed this thing. I followed it all the way into our kitchen. My mom often gets a drink in the middle of the night, so I did not find this at all suspicious. It wasn't until this thing didn't stop in the kitchen and started walking into the laundry that I began to feel uneasy and suspicious. I remember poking my head into the entrance of the laundry just as the thing disappeared into the darkness of the laundry. The next second I hear the toilet flush. This is when I realized my mom never left the toilet and I had followed something through my house thinking it was my mom. To this day, I have no idea what it could have been. The thing started from behind me and moved to the front of me. It had human-like mannerisms and was too short to be my dad, and the only other person in the house was my toddler sister. Anyway, the thing came from behind me, so it is impossible that it was someone in my house. All the curtains in the house were closed and there is no way a mere shadow could move like this thing did, let alone make its way through a home in the middle of the night. So that's it, I still don't know what it was, and aside from some minor things or events that could probably be logically explained, nothing else ever happened in the house. When I was young, between the ages of 3 to 6, we lived on the top of a hill in a small town in West Virginia. I was always outside playing with my two imaginary friends. One I called Keithy and the other was named Kelly. Both were grown men, always silent. They just walked around with me and I talked to them nonstop. I remember very vividly that they wore dark-colored suits, and I think now they may have been old military uniforms. What was most bizarre was that one didn't have a hand, and the other was headless. I don't quite remember this exact moment, but my mother told me that I had asked if they could come inside and eat dinner with us. When we were sitting at the table, my mom was instantly chilled and felt like something wasn't right. She said that a door kept opening and closing. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, and just kept giggling and telling them to stop. Later on, we learned that our neighbor's house was being built over a long-forgotten cemetery. Perhaps they weren't imaginary friends, but maybe they were ghosts after all. When I was 9, the year my abusive, alcoholic dad died, I was twice visited by a disembodied hand. The first time it happened, I had dropped my pillow off the side of the bed. I reached down to grab it and a hand from under the bed grabbed my hand and tried to pull me under. I laid awake until the sun came up. Frozen in place. The second time I was sitting on the front porch with my friend, talking about my dad and the horrible stuff he did. Our front door was open and you could see straight through the living room, dining room, and kitchen, right to the back door. You could catch a glimpse of the edge of the stove in the kitchen doorway. The phone in the kitchen rang. I got up to answer it and saw the hand on the edge of the stove, thumping its fingers on the white enamel, waiting for me. This was in a small town in northern Ontario about 27 years ago. I was 7, woke up in the middle of the night and went downstairs to get some water. As I was coming back from the kitchen to go upstairs, I saw a little old lady in an old-timey nightgown, long white hair, nightcap on, brushing her hair with those old brushes. She says in a sweet voice, "Go back to bed, dearie." I wasn't afraid. I said okay and started up the stairs. When I reached the top, she was gone. I never told anyone, probably because she seemed so sweet and not scary. Flash forward 24 years later and I'm sitting at my parents' table talking about ghosts and stuff. My dad starts talking about that house and the lady in the white nightgown, brushing her hair. I asked him to describe her and he did, to a T. He said she said the same thing, "Go back to bed, dearie." I told him what happened and we all had goosebumps. Kinda freaky but not scary, I guess. I am a paranormal junkie only in the sense that I love the stories and histories of ghosts, aliens, and the unexplained. I'm more of a skeptic because I feel there are logical explanations for most everything, but I'm open-minded because not everything can be explained all the time. Last year, I went on a haunted ghost walk, a tour I had done before because it's Halloween and it's fun. This tour is billed as being authentic, in that it's not a jump out and scare you thing, and they hope you'll experience something but make no guarantees. One of our stops was an old bed and breakfast. Our guide told us the story of a man who used to be a doorman there in the 1920s but was murdered. He still haunts the place, primarily the front steps. We were informed to hurry and not speak, lest the ghost attack us. Apparently, a few years ago, he shoved one of the guides down the cement stairs, causing some injuries. Creepy. The B&B has a few cement steps leading to the outer door of the building, then a little landing, kind of like a breezeway, then additional wooden steps leading to the key entry door that leads to the actual lobby. I was at the back of the group, which meant I was essentially the last one in the building. I walked up the cement steps and stood on the indoor landing for a short time while I waited for the last two people, my husband and a friend. They started up the stairs to the lobby. I happened to be standing sideways, with my left side to the outdoor steps and my right side to the indoor steps. Everyone was ahead of me, going up the wooden indoor steps, but I didn't need to hurry because you have to enter single file through the key entry door. In my right ear, I could hear the footsteps of the tour group on the indoor wooden steps. That makes a very distinct sound. But in my left ear, I could hear more footsteps. Footsteps making different sounds, the sounds of the cement stairs outside. I glanced that way, wondering if it was a guest or a lingering group member behind me. There was no one there. Suddenly, I felt a pain in my right jawbone. I turned and hurried up the stairs to the lobby and stood as far from the door as I could. The pain was gone, but I still felt uneasy and stared at the front door. Nobody came in for a long time. I felt ill the rest of the evening, and my dog continually sniffed me when I got home, but not my husband. I'm not a practical joker, and I don't think it was some psychosomatic desire to experience something paranormal. I legitimately heard someone on the stairs. Still creeps me out. My mom had a bad experience with a Ouija board when she was young and warned me to never use one. When I got to be about 16, I decided that I knew everything and would give one a try. My friend lived in his mom's basement, so I decided that would be a good place to give it a try. I headed over to his house, and when I got there I made a Ouija board with construction paper and a marker. I found a Mountain Dew cap to use as the thing you put your fingers on. We set it down on the floor and sat cross-legged around it with his two young female cousins who were over at the time. The entire time leading up to actually trying to use it, everyone was making fun of it and saying that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't much of a surprise when we invited spirits to come talk to us and it didn't work. After a few minutes of nothing happening, my friend got an attitude and sneered, "Come on you stupid fucking evil spirits." The instant he finished saying that, the computer chair sitting a few feet away from everyone slammed down onto the ground. The girls screamed and ran upstairs. My friend and I looked at each other in fear/confusion and retreated into his room. We closed the door and began hearing scuffling noises and banging from the other room in the basement. When we built up the courage to investigate, we found that every box and object had been knocked off of the shelves that were in the corner. That was enough for us. We went into his room, locked the door, and laid down to go to sleep, not understanding what was happening as we were both atheists at this point. The entire night we heard scratching coming from the inside of his closet, so we played music loudly and laid awake all night in fear. I never liked going over to that house after that. I'm not sure if it's related, but his life has really spiraled down after that. He always seemed like a negative person, but it seems like it got way worse after that. As if there was a dark cloud following him around. I wonder if whatever he invited in ever left. I am Native American and grew up on a reservation. We had a bingo hall in my town. My mother worked in that bingo one winter and I would go to work with her occasionally. There had been stories about that place being haunted for years. I was seen several times by several different people speaking to and playing with kids that no one else could see. I then started seeing and playing with them at home, and that is when the nightmares, and I guess you'd call the hallucinations, began. I would see terrifying things at school and would have these feelings of dread that my brothers would be hurt if they didn't return home immediately and things like that. My mother, being sane, took me out the hospital first and I had batteries of tests ran on me. Blood work, MRI, EEGs, PET scans and psychological evaluations. When they found nothing after several weeks in the hospital, my mother sought holistic treatment from a local medicine woman. After following her regimen, which included bathing in a specific plant's roots and drinking tea from the same roots, the vision stopped and the cloud lifted. The medicine woman later told my mother that she had personally taken on the spirits and fought them off. Take it for what you will, but I believe. I grew up in an old farmhouse/homestead. We had the usual weird things, unexplained footsteps, things missing, glimpses of movement out of the corner of your eye. Easily attributed to an old house and small kids living in it. As kids, me and my siblings never wanted to go upstairs if the lights were off there. According to my mom, I always complained about the woman all in white that lurked up there, though I don't remember seeing anything now. Just this overwhelming feeling that she didn't want us up there. I would have nightmares though about a woman in flowing white chasing me throughout the time we lived in that house. My dad, a bear of a man who didn't believe in the supernatural, had his own experience. He came home for lunch one day, and as he passed the kitchen he asked my mom standing at the sink where the kids were. She didn't respond, and when he went back to the kitchen no one was there. My mom was actually in town with us kids, but my dad swears he saw a woman in a long dress standing at the sink like they were doing dishes. I have more stories, but these are the two my family always goes back to when we talk about that house. After we moved out and the power was cut, people would always call to tell us they saw lights on in the house and stuff too. It was really freaky living in the place.